We have Walter Larkins with us on the podcast. Walter is a dear friend, co-founded Sapphire RCMS, built multiple companies, sold multiple companies, sits on some of the most prestigious boards in Southern California, is also a board member for the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And it's just such an honor to have you here.
Well, I appreciate the invite, and I look forward to our discussion today.
So Walter, you're an inventor, you're an entrepreneur, you have so many different facets, and you've built multiple companies. In all these companies you've built, including multiple really prestigious exits, what's your most memorable experience?
Well, I have to say the first time is like anything else. The first time you do something, it's more memorable because of all the challenges that you didn't know you're going to experience that you end up having to experience and work through.
Tell me about the first time.
Well, the first time I was working for a company called Johnson & Johnson, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, and I was in the medical device division of that company, and they developed many new technologies related to doing surgery, minimally invasive surgery. So the company I was in was responsible for building a brand new market to do what was previously open surgery, meaning a big incision, to minimally invasive. And so during that time, I was promoted a number of times because it was a J&J startup. And I had the idea that observing maybe 10 or 15 heart surgeries, that wouldn't it be better if you didn't have a big incision in your chest? I mean, it sounds like an obvious question to ask, but at that time, that's how you access the heart. You open it up. So I had an idea, a spark of an idea. It wasn't a fully formed idea because the idea was so big, I couldn't imagine how to do it. It was just that, why don't we explore ways to do heart surgery without opening the chest? Now that sounds like a simple, big question. So I went to my VP of Sales and Marketing with that question. I said, why don't we explore and open a division or a lab to study minimally invasive heart surgery? And this is what he told me. He said, Walter, we don't invest in ideas. We only invest in markets. If you prove there's a market, we consider investing. However, you're doing a great job what you're doing. Keep on doing it. And that was the answer that my boss gave me. And with that, I quit my perfectly good job to pursue this big idea. So that was the scarier part. The scary part was leaving a job that you enjoyed but felt limited and pursuing something that you felt was going to make a difference.
What was that move like, moving from not being an entrepreneur to now just having all these facets, handling your finances, having to open bank accounts, having to run errands, having to clean the floors at a point of time? Like, how is that whole thing of doing so many things, managing so many sides, and especially working at a company like Johnson & Johnson where all these facets are taken care of, all the way from the CFO to the janitor? How was that move to entrepreneurship?
I can't tell you how ignorant I was. I thought, I was naively thinking that I can get my company funded in 6 months. I said my idea was so obvious that everyone I talked to would be interested in investing. And so how was it? I figured out after I maxed out my credit cards and all those other things, sold my J&J stock, I found out in 6 months, if I didn't get money, then I was going to be in trouble already. So I would say the shock of recognizing how little I actually knew about how to even get started. So that I would say it's just what I didn't know was the shock. I didn't even get to the stage of knowing all these hats were on my head because I didn't know what hats I had to have.
So how was it from not knowing to getting the shock of knowing?
Well, I'll tell you how I got the shock. Okay, so I had managed to drill down what the idea actually was, the fundamental idea that was going to make this operation happen. And I happened to get a medical illustrator that I was friends with during my J&J days that was willing to draw how heart surgery is done right now, and then how it would be done with the device that I had invented. And a friend of mine got me a VC meeting. And so I went into this meeting and I made my pitch to the venture capitalist. And this is what he told me after the pitch. He goes, Walter, we checked your references over in J&J, and you've done some fantastic things over there. But you don't have a business plan, you don't have a prototype, you don't have a PowerPoint, you don't have a patent, you've never run a company. And frankly, everyone we talk about your idea, they don't think it's going to work. But when you figure all that stuff out, come back and talk to us. So it wasn't until I heard that at the VC meeting that I recognized what I needed to do. So what might appear like a big no, to me was a checklist that I didn't even know I needed to have. And that's really what got me focused. That's when I figured out, okay, these are the hats I have to have, and I don't have no information on how to do 80% of it.
I love that. Now you have a checklist. You're a young entrepreneur with an idea, with experience in the industry, but no experience building a company. How is going through the checklist?
Okay, that was the first thing was money. Okay, because I was running out. And I was Mr. Mom at the time. So I had been married before and divorced, and I had custody of my son. So when people say, oh, you shouldn't start a company when you have kids or anything, I had a kid when I was doing this startup. So the first thing I had to do was get money. And I had been to a lot of fundraisers as part of my job at J&J. Of course, they have fundraisers at the hospital, fundraising for different projects that hospitals are involved in. And I got one of the surgeons I worked with to give me a ticket for free to this fundraiser, where I was at this table where all these guys who had money were going to support this whatever cause that they're promoting at the event. So I brought a surgeon along with me, who was the assistant surgeon who developed a lot of these minimally invasive procedures for general surgery. So we're sitting on the table, 10 people on the table, and I see this guy next to me, and I start pitching him my idea. And I tell him about the market and the opportunity. I did obviously start figuring out what that was. And he said, wow, that's very interesting. And I introduced him to my surgeon buddy next to me. And he looks over at my surgeon buddy, and I expected the guy to know what the assignment was. And he asked my friend, he says, so, what do you think about his idea? And he looks at this guy, and this guy happened to be the great-great-great-grandson of the colonel who led the black troops during the Civil War, like in the movie. And I said, God, this guy's perfect as an investor. And my friend goes, frankly, I don't think it's going to work. And so I, of course, couldn't do anything about that situation at the moment. I learned an immediate lesson, which was never bring someone to the table unless you know what exactly they're going to say. But the guy next to him said, what's your name? And I said, my name's Walter. He said, Walter, you know what? I like your idea. I'd consider investing. And this guy was the retired chairman of a company called Fairchild Fasteners that puts all these bolts in these aircraft. And he became my first mentor and first investor. So after that, we had a meeting, and I told him I'd bought a whole duffel bag full of books, how to be a controller, engineering your startup, all these books that you read about how to get a startup going. And he said, Walter, you can read all these books. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't read them because, they're good to read. But I'm going to tell you the story between the lines of the books. Because that's the one that no one tells you, and that's the one that you're going to need to learn how to build your company. And it says, I'm going to introduce you to a patent attorney. I'm going to introduce you to an investment banker that I know from Stanford that can help you make presentations to VCs. What can you do? Okay, and I said, well, I can get my device prototype, I can do the labs, and I can get surgeons behind my concept. Okay, well, I'll work on that list, and I'll work with you on the other things on the list. And that's sort of how I got started. Is my mentor ended up being someone I met randomly at a fundraiser. So I got money and a mentor in one shot.
Now, you have a mentor, you're the first few lists in your checkbox that. Now you can finally get to building and getting the ball rolling with the minimum viable product. How was that process, building the minimum viable product?
It was an iterative process like everything else. Since mine was a medical device, obviously you have to get someone who has expertise, whether it's a software or whether it's a medical device or whatever it is. You want to find someone with some expertise and passion to do it, because it's extremely expensive. Not as expensive now, but certainly a lot more expensive then, to get someone to build something for you without building 1,000 of them. You're just talking about building like one. And sometimes that cost can be very prohibitive. But the same thing applies. If you have a product or service that's going to make a difference, you can also sell that vision to the people that can help build your product and get them behind it. You being able to sell your vision in the future is so critical to your skill. If you don't have it, you better develop it. And if you can't develop it, you find someone else, because a lot of inventors aren't in the sales mode. You've got to find someone to do that. But I was lucky. I obviously had some sales experience, and I sold this company that built catheters into the idea of what we wanted to do. He was excited by it. He didn't even charge us for the first 5 prototypes. And then I was able to use my relationships with various labs to be able to test these things out with a heart surgeon that I developed a relationship with over the past couple of years.
So developing these relationships and all of these, building out these connections, how, like for an entrepreneur who's now in that stage of having maybe the first small check, maybe a small angel check, or maybe even some small family and friends round with some basic capital, and maybe a few mentors within the industry, not too much industry exposure. How would you recommend him or her going about building that minimum viable product?
Well, I was in that exact scenario. I mean, frankly, I'd never built a product before from scratch. It really does wrap around creating networking is so key, is what you mentioned. Networking is so key, and using your network to build relationships with other people that can assist you in your vision is the key thing to success. Because you're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of people that are telling you no, and your idea is not going to work along the way. Especially if you're talking about a startup that's from the ground zero, that 2.5 or 3 year process, when everyone's trying to catch up to you, but you haven't arrived at the point where opportunity and your invention connect or cross. That could take a couple of years, or it could take 5 years. So I was fortunate that for me, it took about 2.5 years. So we did not get to the point where, with my product before I sold it, where we had a product that we could use in a patient, because obviously that's a whole other process. What I had is a prototype that we tested in an animal model to demonstrate that we could actually operate on an animal model without having to open that animal's chest, and we could perform the surgery through small incisions between the ribs. So once we validated that, then all the surgeons that said this was impossible, we could address that objection. And when our patent issued, it takes about 2.5 years. When our patent issued, I call it coming out of the black hole. It takes 2.5 years for it to come out of the black hole. When it bursts out of the black hole, you are so excited. It's like, oh my God, I got a patent, because it's not an easy process. So our patent issued, and then another company's patent issued 6 months after ours. So it came out, there it is. It's another patent, not like ours, but similar enough to cause us like, whoa, who's this company? And I know they did the same thing with us. Like, whoa, who's this company? They're ahead of us. So, but at the same time, the VCs and particularly became interested in minimally invasive surgery. minimally invasive heart surgery. So all of a sudden it became a thing. And so it being a thing, our early IP, all the work we've done to develop the product to where we could test it and prove that it could work, set us up for that opportunity when our patent issued and everyone became interested in our company.
How long did that process take from?
Well, from the time of my crazy moment of leaving my perfectly good job up until the time that VCs were interested, it was 2.5 years, which is actually pretty short in starting a company time frame.
No, it's amazing to think about just that, especially since you were building a hardware product. Like, unlike an application, you really can't put it out there.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is when you, as an entrepreneur, you don't have to really, you do have to think about what your exit looks like. And depending on the investors that you have. All my investors were angels. When my patent issued, then the VCs started becoming interested because the market, the VCs are kind of like sheep to a certain degree. They follow where the market's going to go, and that was very hot to them. Oh my God, minimally invasive heart surgery, that's going to be a thing. Of course, we thought it was a thing like 2.5 years ago, and no one would talk to us. But all of a sudden, it became a thing. So it seems like a short time. But I tell you, when you get angel money, it is not that much money. You really do have to struggle quite a bit. So you're still trying to figure out how to make it. I made 54 VC presentations in 2.5 years. Rejected every single time. It wasn't until the 55th one, after our patent issued, that they started, circling around us and trying to write us, checks. And that situation. That's a whole story of how we had to deal with that.
No, that's beautiful. It's also like how key was having the right mentors when you were building the MVP?
Critical. The thing is, for most people, entrepreneurship is a word. You're really not truly an entrepreneur until you've really made the decision to jump in with both feet. It's hard to dip into entrepreneurship because it's so overwhelmingly time consuming. I mean, you will consume time that you didn't even know you had. If you're in a relationship and your relationship isn't on board of you being an entrepreneur and knowing that you're going to spend more time with your team than you will with them oftentimes, unless you're partners with your significant other, it's going to be challenging, and not many people are willing to make that kind of commitment. So the mentor you have has to be there to support you when you're facing a lot of the challenges that you're going to be facing, including the money challenges. They have to be able to be there and write a check if that's something that's necessary to get your company, to the next level. But he was also an investor, so he was obviously motivated to keep me active and moving forward, but not so much money that I would be too comfortable. And so that's the situation that you deal with oftentimes when you're dealing with angels. And maybe in the VCs to a certain degree too, they'll give you money, but you don't want you to be too comfortable. They want you to be able to work to help them get to the next level.
And it's also like I don't think so often it's stressed enough on how important it is to find the right one.
Yeah, I didn't know what that meant in the beginning. Okay, now since that time I've a lot more experience and I've grown to know what the right investor is. Now, my first investor, I got very lucky. He and I became friends. It's like a marriage, it really is. If you take money from someone, that is truly a bond, a commitment on your part that you're going to help them get a return on their investment, and you're going to dedicate whatever time is necessary to be successful, and commitment on their part that they're going to be able to help you when things get tough, not just be there when things are easy. When things get tough, that they're going to be there for you and be able to write some checks if you have to get through it, or even just give you some advice. Sometimes you struggle on basic stuff. Who should I use for my bank? Who should I use for my accountant? Who should I use for my lawyer? I mean, these are things when you're just starting out. I mean, how would you know this information unless there wasn't someone there to help you with that? And this person had a big enough network of connections that in a Rolodex that I didn't, it was like, okay, here you use this person, use that person, use the other person. So I didn't have to worry about that. I just had to have the question, and he provided me with the resource.
It's also one of those areas you need to take a gamble with sometimes, but like it's asymmetrical returns to finding the right person. Like finding the right person can significantly improve it going forward.
Yeah, and like I said, now having gone through various deals since that time, trust is given and then earned. So as an entrepreneur, you can't, to be into business, you can't really just not be a trusting person because a deal would never happen. That's what attorneys are for. They're the people that don't trust anyone. But you have to be a trusting person in order to engage in any business. What I have found though is that I use like a three-legged stool way of trying to figure out who I can trust before I let the relationship move too far forward. And it's a metric of their ego, their greed, and their envy. Those three attributes, if they're out of control, it isn't a question of if you're going to have a problem with this person. It's just a question of when you're going to have it. And that's what I use. If I engage with someone and they're very focused on these three areas, or I detect that they're sort of out of control, those are absolute, I'm not going to allow myself to trust this person. So that's, I guess, my gate in trying to identify whether it's an investor or a friend or whatever. Those are the things that I found screw up deals, screw up relationships, as those things are all not aligned with you at all.
I love that. Taking a step back, now moving from the perspective you building the company to now being a mentor to so many, and also from chairing the Economic Development Council for the city and sitting on numerous boards, working with many startups directly and indirectly, and still co-CEOing a larger company. In today, when you look at building an MVP, is it different from building your first MVP?
Well, I will say that technology has advanced to a level where it's so much easier to do. I mean, I will tell you, especially when you're talking about software, even prototyping, it's so much easier and much lower cost than it used to be. So in terms of that, it's so much easier being an inventor and entrepreneur because all those tools exist. And that's great. That's the positive side is that. The challenging part is it's great and it's easy. That means that there are other people in the world trying to do the same thing you're trying to do. So you have to try to create a certain sense of urgency. I always say in the world, there's three people with your exact idea. One talks to their friends or family, and their friends and family convince them that their idea isn't going to work, and therefore they abandon it. And the other two are basically in a race. And it's the one that has the most persistence and desire that's going to win that race on who's going to bring that product or service or whatever you have, to market. So on one hand, the benefit is that you have all the tools now to create an MVP quickly. I wouldn't necessarily rely strictly delivering a product to a customer, like a real customer that isn't tested, like for example, Microsoft model where they release something and it doesn't have to work properly and then they get user input on why it's not working. I think that model works if you've got 80% market share, but when you're a startup and people are judging you against other companies that are much larger, you do have to spend the time in making sure that you do some testing on your product and can anticipate some of the challenges that a customer might have, so you can build that into your pitch to them, that they become a partner in you in iterating through the development process. So yes, it is easy. You're going to have more likely competition that you didn't anticipate before because other people can do what you're doing quickly. But it's really the persistence and desire and commitment that really is going to make you win the race. the race.
So if you build, as an inventor, if you're building a new idea today, walk me through how you would go about the MVP.
Well, I've got ideas on the shelf right now. All inventors, they have this shelf of ideas that they just can't, they don't have the time bandwidth to do them all. You know, one of my friends back in the day, he was a business guy, and he said, Walter, I like to put my eggs in lots of baskets. And I used to tell him, you know, it's okay to have your eggs in all the baskets, but if you don't sit on one, then none of them hatching. So you do have to sit on your egg, you know, your idea egg, to hatch. So as far as building your MVP and trying to get to your product to market, if you have lots of ideas, I suggest that you look at the time horizon when you think that market is going to open up, and then you prioritize your investment and time on those things. The minimum valuable product, you're going to have to find people that don't believe in your product and talk to them. And then once you sort of get the time horizon on your various inventions that you may have, pick one, sit on it, and then talk to customers that are going to say bad things about it, because those are going to be your objections. The investors are going to have the objections, the VCs, and your customer is going to have them. Then find the people that are really 100% behind your vision and have them write a white paper about your idea. It doesn't have to be fully baked. You know, it can be, you know, need another hour or two in the oven. But if you can get a potential customer to write credibility about you as a person and you as the product you're trying to develop, that does build confidence in the VC that you're going the right direction. Because they're going to talk to people that don't believe your idea will happen, and they also want to talk to people you found that do.
So if you build, like, how long do you think you should, after you, like, how fast do you think you should iterate with an MVP? Because that's something I've seen a lot of startups struggle with. After they have the MVP out there, they're getting feedback. Because you're getting feedback constantly. Right.
Well, the question always is, depending on your investor, some investors want to make money. So they're interested in your MVP making money. How is it going to make money? Who's your customer? So they're really wrapped around those kinds of questions. When can I see revenue coming in? And I know you mentioned that at some point, you know, VCs obviously have a different mindset. They want to see traction. They want to see, you know, we don't care about money. We want to see customers having, you know, traction on your idea. So some of it depends upon who your investor is. My feeling is you always have to think about how your product is ultimately going to make money, because it is going to satisfy both VC and angel investor needs. On the angel investor side, if you show a business plan that's going to make money, a company doesn't care about your customers if they acquire you. They care about your product, and if you've already done the work to show that the customers they have will buy your product, then that's the basis upon which they'll purchase you. VCs, you know, have a different sort of strategy on how they value your company, and so for VCs, you know, it's all these rounds of funding you're going to raise. You have to figure out a way to increase the value of your product or service. And sometimes it's not your product that they're really buying; it's the vision
and the market.
Right, the vision, the market that you see. If it's big enough, even if you have abandoned completely your MVP, because you know the market's moving so quick, you have to really seriously change your strategy or your product in major ways. That's okay, because you envision a market. The market is sometimes the most important thing that the VC or even investors are thinking about. This market is going to be big. You're going to disrupt this, that, or the other thing. And if it happens that you have to buy another product, you know, once you get enough money that has intellectual property wrapped around it that addresses the market you envision, that's okay too. So that's how I looked at it. I knew that J&J told me exactly what I needed to know when I quit my Presid job. Walter, we don't invest in ideas, we invest in markets. So the reason that my first company got acquired is because they saw the market as being huge. And they felt my product, a number of other products, suite of products that would be necessary, was fundamental to addressing that market need that we perceive.
What about like raising venture capital or any money, angel, before, like after an MVP, before an MVP, or after a product in the market?
Angel investors are better, in my opinion, for before you have an MVP. And I think obviously you have to get to that stage, and the VCs aren't going to be interested in you at all. So you have to find friends and family and angel investors that are going to be able to get you to a certain stage. There are seed level investors, they call them. Some of them are professional, and some of them are professional angel investors, and they'll write a bigger check for you. That allow you to get further along, in the MVP process. So, I mean, and then if you're talking about venture capital, that's where you have to make a fundamental decision as an entrepreneur, because when you get VC money, you are going to lose control of your company. Okay, I mean, this is not a question of if, it's just when. You are going to lose control of your company, because that is a pathway. And I was offered that opportunity with my first company. We had a VC syndicate that wanted to throw a lot of money our way. That for that time was a lot of money. It was like $10 million. Give us $10 million. They had this very onerous, at least my opinion was at the time, a term sheet. They want to control my board, take, I think it was 49% of the company at that time. And we had to make some serious decisions about whether we want to do that. And I just felt sometimes it's your gut feeling. I just didn't feel that was, and they wanted to do other things. For example, they wanted me to take equity back from people who I'd already given equity to, that helped me get to the stage that I was in, because they want to control as much equity as they can under the auspices of you owning more of the company. But then you have to abandon people that got you to the point where you're even talking to VCs, because you do have to give up equity along the way. Hopefully not enough that you lose control, because you have to have enough control to have the VCs interested in your deal. If you lose control of your company before you raise venture money, they're going to reorganize your company, and you're going to have a lot of unhappy early investors. So it gets really complicated when you start looking at those kinds of things. But some fundamental errors you can be making in the beginning, like giving up too much equity in the beginning to where you lose control too early, and when the VC deal comes in, how loyal are you going to be to the people that got you there?
So before we wrap up, any advice you'd give to a founder who's still figuring his way out? Whether to be a founder, whether not to be a founder, has an ambitious idea and just about getting ready to build an MVP, but not even committed to whether or not, what would be your advice you'd give him?
For me, it's pretty easy. Okay, I learned in retrospect. I mean, as I was going through battle, there's a lot of confusion. But once you kind of get through your first deal, frankly, this is what it comes down to. What kept me from losing my mind when I quit my perfectly good job is, one, I knew that I can always get another job. That was my worst case scenario. The second thing was, if I don't do this, am I going to have regret? Okay, because regret you cannot recover from. And those two things basically is what keeps me even motivated, to this day. I don't want to live with regret, and I can always get another job, which is my worst case scenario.
Of that. Thank you so much for making time. This is such an honor and privilege to host you on.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Kunal.